Evening, everyone. I'm Reverend Bob Moore. I'm Executive Director of the Coalition for Peace Action. And on behalf of the Coalition, I want to welcome you to this annual holiday gathering for peace. We have a very special program this evening. We'll be celebrating a major milestone in terms of the nuclear weapons ban treaty that was negotiated at the UN in 2017 and for which the international campaign to ban nuclear weapons, to abolish nuclear weapons rather, that's where the A comes in, and ICAN, that we'll be celebrating. They won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for their leadership, and so the person who helped them get to this important milestone in terms of getting the 50th country to ratify, that's what triggered the entry into force. So this will become part of international law on January 22nd, 90 days from, I think it was October 24th, that 50th country ratified. So we have a wonderful program tonight. I just want to give you a quick overview. Nikki Van Aller, our Assistant Director, will introduce our speaker, Seth Sheldon. Then Seth will talk for 20 or 25 minutes. While he's talking, feel free to use the chat box to start putting your questions in. And once Seth's talk is done, we'll go through those questions and spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes. I'll read them so you all are on mute, except for those of us who are speaking, but you can submit the questions through the chat box and I'll read them, as many as we're able. And then at the end of that, we're going to have an actual toast to this historic milestone and the success of it that Ed Aguilar, our Pennsylvania director of the Coalition for Peace Action, will offer. And then we will conclude with a wonderful celebratory music by a wonderful folk singer in our midst, Charlene Leahy. So that is our program for this evening. And again, welcome. And I'd like to next turn the mic over to Nikki Van Aller to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Bob. I'm sure many of you know from our promotions of the event and from what Bob just said, Seth Sheldon is our guest tonight, and he's here representing ICAN. He is their UN liaison and assists governments in joining the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. He's also a performer and musician, which I would love to hear more about. But take it away on the treaty.
Yeah, okay. Well, first, thank you so much. Thank you, Reverend Moore and Nikki, for inviting me, for introducing me. It's really an honor to be asked to speak to you today and to be able to speak about something that we're celebrating, because, you know, this has been a year when I think a lot of people haven't had too much to celebrate. And so it's an honor, and it's been an honor to be part of this movement, as many of you have, and to have been working as I have been for that 50th ratification for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, which, as Reverend Moore says, enters into force on January 22nd, just a little over a month from today. You know, and in thinking through what to say today, it was a real opportunity for me to reflect a bit, because it's been so crazy. I haven't really stopped too much to do much reflection, and it's a great opportunity. Because, well, you know, as I start off, one of the first things I would like to think about and acknowledge is a bit about the sacrifice and the loss, who has suffered, who has struggled in this struggle long before I showed up, and including a lot of people, I'm sure, here, but of course many more, you know, people who haven't been with us as we've gotten to this stage and whose shoulders we stand on in getting here. That's a pretty long list, of course, but I'd like to think about a few ones to call out. I also know it's important, just to anticipate where this discussion might go. As I talk to you about what we're celebrating, I can acknowledge that, of course, this year's win is not an end in itself. No one is under the illusion that this treaty and the entry into force of the treaty is the last stop on this journey. That's especially true and palpable for those of us in the United States. We know this. But it's a milestone achievement that will advance nuclear disarmament. We're not going to get another nuclear weapon ban treaty anytime soon. And we have to celebrate it in order to realize its full potential. So thank you for bringing me here to help celebrate it. Let's do that. I think I'll try to begin, I suppose, by offering a bit of context for what we're celebrating, where we've gotten to, and perhaps tell the story of what I've been doing this last few years and how we got to number 50. And then maybe we talk a bit about entry into force and what that actually means and what happens next. I guess that's a lot. So let me see how far we get in the time that we have allotted. But Nikki or Reverend Moore, just tell me if we should wrap up anytime soon for next things. But first, I'll start with a bit of context because, as I'm sure most of you know, this has been an important year even before it became an important year. I mean, in the sense that we've been at this for 75 years collectively, right? 75 years exactly. This year we commemorated the 75th anniversary of the US dropping atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th. And at the ceremony that ICANN coordinated to mark that occasion, 4 states deposited their instruments of ratification: Ireland, Nigeria, Niue, on August 6th, and then St. Kitts and Nevis, that's one country, St. Kitts and Nevis, on August 9th. So there you go, that was 4 right there that we needed in that journey. This year, we also commemorate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations itself. October 24th was UN Day, that marked the entry into force of the UN Charter. Well, that just so happened to be that day that Honduras deposited number 50, the 50th ratification to the treaty that was that milestone number we needed to bring about entry into force. And then this coming January 24th, that's just 2 days after the TPNW enters into force, which is just 2 days after we welcome the inauguration of the next US president, of course, by the way. But on January 24th, that's the 75th anniversary of the UN's very first resolution, which, as you probably know, was a resolution that established a commission to ensure the elimination of nuclear weapons. That was the UN's very first goal. So here we are in the 75th year after all of these big events. Numbers are even numbers. It's not even an even number, but major milestone numbers are insignificant in fact, but there's some things that milestones are useful for humans to have something to work around. And it's been, as hard as we've worked to shepherd, our team has worked to shepherd these countries to deposit at certain times, the truth is that some of these are, coincidences. It's not like Ireland, for instance, was holding out for 3 years so that they could deposit on the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima, but the timing has been meaningful. And it's a meaningful opportunity for us to think about where we are in the struggle. I mean, civil society has been an instrumental part of this effort since its inception, right? I mean, since the Red Cross was there on the ground in Hiroshima to immediately report about unconscionable effects of nuclear weapons, to the Hibakusha and nuclear test survivors whose testimony continues to be our most important tool, really, in warning people, to the doctors and scientists who have initiated efforts to study and convey to people the ongoing effects of nuclear weapons on human bodies and on climate and on the environment, to the civil rights activists who help make the connection between patriarchal politics of racism and colonialism with nuclear weapons. So I realize that, Coalition for Peace Justice have played a key role in some of these milestones along the way, including, as Reverend Moore was just saying to me right before we started, about in the nuclear freeze movement in the 1980s. These things are, we stand on these efforts or try to continue them. They inspire how civil society is proceeding. So how are we proceeding? Well, ICANN, in case for those who don't know, was founded in 2007 with the purpose of uniting those in civil society who believe that a prohibition treaty is necessary and to work with governments to bring it about. It began working with states to get them to acknowledge the simple notion, really, to us, I think, that any use of nuclear weapons would result in catastrophic humanitarian consequences. This narrative developed during a series of conferences in Norway, Mexico, and Austria, culminating with the Humanitarian Pledge signed by 127 countries, where those states that signed expressed concern too about the rising risks that nuclear weapons would again be used. And these are the same groups of non-nuclear weapon states that were frustrated with the slow pace of fulfillment of by the nuclear armed states of commitments they had made toward disarmament. So this is sort of the background often referred to as the humanitarian shift, because this is the process that was really about reframing the debate as not one that was just concerned with the security of states who were claiming to need these weapons, or that it was part of their own, it was their sole decision whether or not to disarm, but rather as one that would be reframed as concerned more with the security of people and humanity, recognizing that use of these weapons and the effects of them extend beyond borders and and extend beyond the states of conflict. So this humanitarian shift is what led to the open-ended working group that helped lead to a resolution in 2016 to pursue negotiations, which brought about the conference to negotiate the treaty in 2017, which brought about the treaty. So just to cut through some of the recent history there, and that was the treaty negotiations happened throughout 2017 at the UN in New York. And then the treaty was adopted on July 7th, 2017 by 122 countries. And then in December of that year, ICANN was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So it was an exciting year. But the last 3 years, especially for me, I think have been really also quite exciting and very purposeful. It's been all about the next task, which was to get this treaty into force, which required getting the 50 countries to ratify by the terms of the treaty. That's what would trigger its entry into force. So that work, that's been an effort advanced by ICANN's partners in each country. Today, that's around 600 organizations in 106 countries. But within ICANN's staff team, we've been really a 3-person team coordinating these efforts. It's been Tim Wright, and he's our treaty coordinator in Australia, and Celine Nary doing regional coordination from Geneva, and me in New York. We're in 3 different time zones. There's 2 of us awake at all times, talking to states as they've been advancing their processes and talking to our campaigners, working with them. It's been very exciting. It's been inspiring to see these governments work toward this despite the roadblocks thrown in their way. I know that Ray Atchison spoke to you about a year ago and predicted that she thought we would get to entry into force in 2020. And she's almost right, and we're off by a few weeks. And that's despite some major challenges, including the challenges of the pandemic, of course. It's very difficult to get national processes moving while the parliaments have been shut down. Moreover, it's been despite inordinate and unprecedented pressure from nuclear armed states telling other states not to sign and ratify. And recently going even further, some of you may have seen that letter that the US sent in October, in the weeks before we got our last ratifications, taking their pressure campaigns beyond what we had seen before with these closed door démarches. But with this letter, they openly asked states that had ratified to withdraw their ratification, something we believe to be unprecedented. And in any case, we now know to have been unsuccessful. Even before then, powerful voices were saying we'd never get this far. I was thinking about on the day that we got to 50, I tweeted this poll that came out in 2019 from the Carnegie International Nuclear Policy Conference, where there were over 800 experts, and they took a poll about whether the TPNW would enter into force by March 2021. Okay, so that's, so this coming March. And at that poll, only 5% of those polled said that they were confident that the treaty would enter into force. 50% said we'd have less than a 20% chance. And we're beating that date by nearly 2 months. So I've kept that printed out over my desk for inspiration and now as a reminder. Because, these are Ray has told me, time and again, these are the same people who doubted our progress at every step and worked to stop us along the way. The fact that states have stood up to this pressure to do what they know to be right, it's a remarkable testament to the force of this initiative. So I suppose I can tell a little bit more about how this year went and what we're celebrating and how we got there despite this pressure and despite the challenges of the pandemic that ravaged so many people. I personally am observing these holidays for the first time in my life without my brilliant father having lost him to COVID. He was a musician. Nick, you mentioned I was a musician. He brought me up as a musician. And he has been the most supportive person in my life throughout all the pursuits I've had. And, that he was proud of this as well is what made me want to make sure that we got here this year and made it all the more personal for me. But I know there are so many people among us that are suffering now. And I'm thinking too about those in our movement, like, I don't know how many of you know Sister Ardith Platt. Probably you've encountered her over the years, and I met her when I started working for ICANN, and she just passed away in September, just before we reached 50. She, of course, was one of those among those who went to prison for her activism, having sprayed a fighter plane with her own blood to protest nuclear weapons. She sacrificed so much for this, inspired so many people. This reminds me to acknowledge also the Plowshare 7. I think you're probably familiar with the 7 Catholic activists who in 2018 went to the Kings Bay Naval Submarine Base in Georgia with their own blood. And they were all convicted this year and sentenced to prison. Just 2 days ago, actually, on Monday, 2 of them began their sentences. So I'm just thinking a lot about the work that people have done and the sacrifices they have made and how important this has been to so many people. And it's very humbling to reflect on that as we're celebrating for me. And especially it also, I think this year has brought into sharp clarity a lot of the arguments that I'm sure all of us know here about nuclear weapons. But, we can approach it from so many angles, I think, but just talking about money alone, ICANN put out these studies this year about how much money we spent on nuclear weapons, as we do typically. But this year we sort of used it to show what else we could have spent that money on. The US spent $35 billion on nuclear weapons in 2019. And so ICANN did a little calculation showing that would have paid for 300,000 beds in intensive care units and 35,000 ventilators, salaries for 150,000 nurses and 75,000 doctors. We did this math for all 9 nuclear armed states. The total spent, by the way, for all nuclear armed states in 2019 was $73 billion, which was $7 billion up. We haven't done the math for this year yet, but that's just one angle in which, I think the COVID pandemic has helped us understand where we are and what we're doing and how insane it is. I think, we could also talk a lot about what we've seen from, speaking of incarceration, as I just was, about the Black Lives Matter movement and racist policing and the work that they have done in this movement over the years, and now how much we want to be supporting and amplifying their efforts also. But my work has been about this year really getting the last ratification. So we began 2020 with 33 ratifications, and before the pandemic became a reality, we got our 34th. So we went into the pandemic needing 16 more. Also before the pandemic, I began this year, I went to Europe with Setsuko Thurlow to meet with governments in a few different countries in Europe. She was actually coming to this ICANN's Paris forum to speak. And she told Dr. Kathleen Sullivan of Hibakusha Stories, who works so closely with her, that she asked if while she was there, she could help us with promoting ratifications. So I set up visits with her in governments in Spain and Andorra, and then Malta, where I brought a little video of her. I'm sure you've seen her too, and most of you know her. She's one of ICANN's most prominent speakers who routinely shares her own experience, a great expense to her. I might note, like, it's not easy for her to tell these stories, but talks about her own experience as a 13-year-old girl the day that the bomb was dropped in Hiroshima, and how she was told to climb to the light, and in more recent years to get out of the rubble that she was buried in, and how she always reflects on that and says that in these years, her light has been this treaty. If you haven't heard her speak, which I'm sure most of you had, I think you should. We're very lucky to have her, because there's not that much longer that we would expect to have these hibakusha to give their direct testimony. So anyway, this was early on, just as Europe was starting to deal with the pandemic. And I went to a number of governments there to campaign for the treaty. Ratification is not typically simple. It's a big commitment for a lot of countries. And so, like I said, the pandemic really slowed things down. And the fact that we did it anyway, I think it really shows how important this initiative was for so many. So we got Namibia was our first pandemic ratification. And the UN had to figure out how a country could deposit a ratification in a situation when the UN was essentially closed. They weren't doing this really. So we had a socially distant handoff and an online ceremony. And then we got a few more: Belize, Lesotho, Fiji. And then we were up to getting these then it became about these last 6. That was a very exciting month from September to October. We got Malta, which was particularly meaningful to me, having just gone there earlier in the year to work for it. Then a couple of Asia Pacific countries, Malaysia and Tuvalu. And October 23rd, we organized the ceremony thinking that we had hopes of getting those last 3 if we were able to bring people together. And Jamaica and Nauru did in fact come through on that day. Honduras was working toward it, but some logistical challenges brought them through. So they happened to only get through on the next day. And like I said, that just happened to be UN Day, the 75th anniversary of the UN Charter. It was very exciting. We celebrated then, we're still celebrating, but the big day will be, according to Article 15 of the treaty, 90 days later, January 22nd. Although I should note that we haven't even stopped then. We're not those numbers aren't static, by which I mean 2 Fridays ago, the week before last, Zimbabwe signed the treaty, signed, not ratified. So we're signatory 85. Last Monday, there was a UN resolutions vote, and 130 countries voted in favor of the treaty. That's the most we've ever had, and that resolution. And then last week, Niger signed the treaty. And then on Friday, Benin ratified the treaty. So they brought us to 51, not 50. So right now we're actually at 51 countries. We hope to have a couple more before the entry into force date. So that's 51 ratifications, 86 signatures, and we think we have this continue with the clear support of 135 to 140 countries, more than 2/3 of the world. And as I see in the chat, it's reflecting, you all know, we do have the opposition of a powerful few as well. So I can talk about that. How am I doing with time here? Well, I guess I'm kind of close on time, but I could talk a little bit about what's going to happen and how we do move forward in nuclear arms states in the U.S. And also in the whole world. Our task is going to continue to be to grow and increase and universalize the treaty, and to use it in the states that support it, and then to use it in the states that don't support it to bring pressure for them to change. There are things we can't predict about the future. So first, some things that we can predict, and maybe I'll drop this in the chart, in the chat, is a paper that we prepared, just sort of giving an overview of this, what entering into force means legally, normatively. Oh, I just sent that to Nikki only. Hold on a second. Here you go. what's going to happen, which is basically that certainly we know that for all states parties, they'll all be prohibited from doing anything relating to nuclear weapons, including things that have not been previously prohibited, because some of them are already have these prohibitions in their local nuclear weapon free zone treaties. But it also prohibits them from assisting or encouraging others to engage in any of the prohibited activities. And that's something that's going to have particular impact even on nuclear armed states. We've seen that, for instance, with divestment campaigns, that states parties will be prohibited from allowing financial institutions in their jurisdictions to invest in nuclear weapon production, even outside of their country. And that's all had an immediate impact, we have seen. And this wasn't inventing the wheel. We had seen it with other treaties as well. We've already seen, even before entering into force, financial institutions redefining nuclear weapons for the first time as controversial weapons, and using it to basically divest. Big pensions like ABP, one of the 5 largest pension funds in the world, have already divested, citing the treaty. So it's in this way that we see how the treaty has impact even where it hasn't yet entered into force, where it continues to contribute to delegitimize and stigmatize both the weapons themselves and the deterrence policies that perpetuate them. And we've seen this from other treaties like the Convention on Cluster Munitions and the Mine Ban treaties, how production has stopped even in states that were not party because of the way the stigma campaigns have worked and the way the divestment campaigns have worked. And so there's a lot still that we can do from here. I know some of you already have done. The I Can't Cities appeal is one initiative that I know some of you have worked on, the New Jersey state resolution with other local Princetonites, perhaps like Zia Mian. The cities appeals are where we have cities in nuclear armed states and umbrella states that do not support the treaty, but we're having cities with the major population centers saying, we do support the treaty and we call on our national government to sign and ratify. And those are very powerful. The more that these grow, we have a lot more force around the arguments that we make to those governments. So it's very helpful. I've been working on one in New York City that has yet to be adopted, but that has a divestment angle as well. New York City currently invests $500 million of its pension funds, city pension funds, in companies that produce and maintain nuclear weapons. So that will be a big win for the campaign also when it arrives. The parliamentary pledge is another thing that we can be working for here in the US. Right now we're looking toward January 22nd. I'm going to put one more thing in the chat and then I think I should probably wrap up. But it's basically a list or a map of that we're just starting to put together of people who are celebrating and where they're celebrating and events that will be happening. We're going to have a live event on January 22nd where we celebrate and sort of check in on different parties that are happening in different places. We have yet to figure out exactly how this will all play out, but the treaty legally is going to enter into force time zone by time zone, starting in the Pacific with Samoa, then New Zealand, then all around the world until back in the Pacific again with Cook Islands and Niue. And there are countdown clocks in Nagasaki and banner actions throughout Europe. And in New York, I'm still planning things. Perhaps the closest one I know about to Princeton is I know in Philadelphia, there's going to be an action at the federal courthouse. So, keep thinking of things and feel free to put the events on the map I just shared that you know about or that you're working on, because we want to make it as big a party as possible. No one pretends that the next phase, of course, will be the lead up to the first meeting of states parties, which has to happen a year within entry into force. And there are some people in Princeton that are very crucial to that and have been working on it. This next phase of the treaty will not be easy, especially with continued opposition, but that opposition is changing and we see ways forward. And I understand that progress has always been thus, powerful voices explaining why a goal is admirable but not plausible, and then people finding a way to make it happen anyway because it's the right thing to do. And so I think the thing that we can do now is celebrate. So thank you very much for all that you're doing, and thank you for celebrating with me today.
Thank you very much, Seth. That was very helpful to understand some of the particulars of how this happened and where, how we can plug in. I'm going to start with a question that was sort of repeated in different ways in the chat box here, and it's really about the impact that this treaty might have on the nuclear armed nations. Of course, as you know, none of the 9 nuclear armed nations have signed the treaty so far. So I think that's really the gist of. There's a little more nuance, for example, from one of the questioners who's a longtime UN association person. What are the prospects for bringing some non-nuclear NATO member states into the treaty regime? Presumably any NATO member state that joins the treaty must adjure any nuclear armed Navy vessels to enter its waters or even nuclear armed aircraft to overfly. So there's a lot there, but I think it's a powerful witness, but what effect might this have on the countries that actually possess nuclear weapons, I think is the gist of the question.
That possess them and or are part of the umbrella, I guess.
Right,
asking about NATO as well. Yeah, it is the question to ask. And yes, as you say, I am aware that the nuclear arms, all too aware of the opposition that has emanated from the nuclear armed states. But as you are aware, as someone who worked in the nuclear freeze movement and was have been a leader throughout that process, these things change. These things change because of the force of, especially in a democracy, of our voices and the work that we do. And we have seen it happen already. I mean, it unquestionably has been from the very start, the unequivocal position of the US certainly, the P3 definitely, and now all of NATO, that the treaty doesn't apply to them, that they will not sign it, that they will not ratify it, and that they will never ratify it or sign it. And it's that last part, I think, that tips their hand all too far, that they're going to speak for the future generations in these democracies and tell them, people who haven't been born yet, what they're going to do. That shows us how much of a strong effect this treaty is already having on them, that it already affects them so much that they know that this is making progress, despite the fact that they're telling us it's meaningless at the same time. If it's so meaningless, why are they working so hard to stop people from signing and ratifying? And what's the path? How are we going to get there? Well, I do think that it will be, in the end, incremental. I mean, the work I do is incremental. It's country by country. And that as we're working toward universalization, getting all of our supporter states to sign and ratify, we're, of course, working on those opponent states as well. Within NATO, which is a key block for us, we do hope to get NATO states to sign and ratify soon, and to break that basically this monolith of countries that are speaking together on this issue so far. And NATO states are primarily democracies as well, and we have already seen this progress happen. In fact, in Belgium, there was just a vote to sign and ratify the treaty in Parliament. And to our surprise, we were way closer than we thought we were going to get to. And it's in part for this reason we think that NATO just yesterday came out with a very strong stance and sort of position again on the treaty, as if we didn't know this, but they felt the need to re-articulate in a somewhat clumsy manner what their position was. But this stands in contrast to I think some of the wins we're already having in some of these states. For example, just a few months ago, we had a letter from some very prominent former leaders of NATO, and as well as Japan and South Korea, so 2 umbrella states outside of NATO. From 56 former leaders of these countries, very prominent people, Ban Ki-moon, very prominent people that were urging support for the treaty and calling on countries to sign and ratify. These are influential people within NATO who are, speaking out against NATO's position right now. And so we see that this is some would have been unthinkable even a year ago, I think. And so we see the path forward. We do think we will get there. We are not there yet, but if we continue in the direction we're continuing, we believe we will get them. And first it will be one of those states, and then it'll be more. And eventually we will also get nuclear armed states to support it as well.
Thank you. Another sort of similar question, but in a slightly different tack. What will the tension or dynamic be between the ban treaty and nuclear weapons reduction between the US and Russia?
Sure. We don't see any tension here. Any attempt to disarm is the right direction. And we don't know what those treaties will be exactly, but to the extent we're just talking about renewing New START, for example, there is nothing that is contradictory or undermining in the TPNW with any other arms control measures, except to the extent that those arms control measures may be brought about in an attempt to legitimize possession. That's the only thing where I can see some conflict is some agreement between the US and Russia to sort of say we're going to reduce weapons, but we're going to sort of, in doing so, try to convince the world that we have this perpetual claim to to continue to possess. That would stand in contrast to and in contravention of their disarmament obligations under the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and what we believe to be international law that's supported by and bolstered by the TPNW. But apart from something like that, I in general, and as much as some of our opponents would like to cast the TPNW as somehow undermining or sort of contradicting the NPT, it's not true. I mean, the TPNW is meant and intended to work with those instruments, to support them, and to support all steps toward disarmament in general.
Right. That sounds on the right track to me. Here's a question that's trying to drill down into what dynamics might have been at play to try to undermine and stop your efforts to get the 50 countries to ratify. What pressures, if any, did Honduras face from the Trump administration not to ratify? How much pressure was applied to other small states?
Well, there are some things that I have learned in this process that I couldn't share, to be honest, but I think suffice it to say that we have certainly seen bilateral démarches, where leaders are meeting with leaders and telling them not to sign and ratify. And I think in the coming years, those probably will become, as these things do, become more public. And a lot of this influence has been exercised in ways that connect to the ongoing scourge of colonialism around the world, in the sense that the nuclear armed states have been working in their various spheres of influence, like the US working in Latin America and France working in Francophone African states. And in the very places, sometimes where they had previously tested nuclear weapons in this really insidious fashion, exercising their sort of perhaps diminishing but still lingering influence, economic influence and political influence, to tell them, don't do this. Don't do this. You mean well, but this is the wrong way to go about it. And as I said, it became somewhat more explicit in the weeks right before ratification, when the Trump administration said, why even do it privately, I guess. Let's send this public letter. Well, it wasn't public, but it was clearly going to get public, and tell states not to just not ratify, but to withdraw ratifications. They sent it to countries that had already done this in this clear affront to multilateralism in general. And, I think in this way that should concern everyone, but that I think should be a priority, by the way, of the Biden administration to renounce and to make clear that every sovereign state has the right to join whatever treaties that they see fit.
Thanks. Here's another question. Two non-NATO European states that are conspicuously not among the states parties to the treaty are Sweden and Finland. What's holding them up? Has there been any political utility for treaty advocates from the swift ratification by the Holy See, the Pope?
I guess I'll take that as a separate question, the Holy See question. But yeah, to take Sweden was, I would attribute this generally. My answer overall will be changing governments and pressure again from NATO states, even though Sweden and Finland, as you say, are not NATO. But Sweden initially was supportive. Their government changed, and their support changed. Our campaigners in Sweden are very active, and we do think that will turn around again. Finland went the other way. Finland was, not supportive, but their government has become more progressive, and we now see that did they abstain this year? I can't even actually remember on the. Well, they have not had a shift in their policy formally yet, but we do think that they too will soon change. But it's really has been. Yeah, they did. I think both Sweden and Finland have been abstaining that Finland has just started abstaining. But in any case, they're abstaining countries right now, and we do think that they will shift further. And then as to, the Holy See, I mean, we have a lot to thank, I think, the Holy See for their strong stance here. We're lucky to have, communities of faith and civil society to be so supportive, but the very strong position taken by the Vatican and the Pope has been influential. We have seen, the Vatican, the Holy See was among the 3 states that both signed and ratified the treaty on the very first day that anyone could do so. And the Pope has come out with very strong statements, including most recently when he was in Hiroshima. This past in August, and has asked Catholic states essentially has asked all states to sign and ratify, but Catholic states have been and states with strong Catholic populations have been very influenced by this, including in Latin America, which has among the largest adherents to the treaty so far, and in Africa.
Thank you. And I myself, I might just interject, I've been really heartened by the leadership of Pope Francis in this arena, and including his visits to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because he really spoke very clearly against possession of nuclear weapons. And I think that was breaking new ground in terms of the faith community, theology, the morality of nuclear weapons. The Catholic bishop's letter in '82 was a good step forward and a strong letter, but it didn't speak out against possession of nuclear weapons. In fact, we had Kermit Johnson, the former chief of Army chaplains, spoke for us a couple of times many decades ago. And one of the things he shared is that Secretary of Defense at the time, Caspar Weinberger, he saw him in the steam room at the Pentagon. And right after that Catholic bishop's letter came out, he saw Weinberger was grinning. And he said, "What are you so happy about, Mr. Secretary?" And Weinberger's responded saying, "They said we could keep them," meaning the nuclear weapons. And so he ignored the rest of it, the support for the nuclear freeze and restraint and so on. He says, well, they said it was legitimate to keep the nuclear weapons. So I think that is really heartening to see the Pope's leadership, and I hope it'll rouse the conscience of people of faith and others across the globe. Another question, does the treaty create a secretariat, or will the Assembly of States Parties rely on the UN Secretariat for support?
Yeah, well, it's the latter. I mean, it's a UN treaty that will not have a separate secretariat, and some of this is yet to be decided by, at the first meeting of states parties. So I don't know how we're going to come out with some of the technicalities on the operation of the treaty, but it's not actually going to require very much in these initial stages, at least, for these non-nuclear weapon states, as far as the operational mechanisms. We just have to do the meetings of states parties, and there's reporting requirements. But yeah, it's all going to happen through the Office of Disarmament Affairs at the UN Secretariat.
Thank you. And here's a question from my own family members who are watching downstairs from where I am. Can we expect one or two nuclear nations to take the first step to disarmament? Is it necessary to make a separate treaty or series of treaties for the big nuclear powers?
It is not necessary for a separate treaty. The U.S., any state with or without nuclear arms, can join this treaty. Article 4 of the treaty has a mechanism by which you can either join the treaty first and then compose a plan to destroy your weapons, or destroy them before and only work through the safeguard systems to ensure that you don't get them, that you don't acquire nuclear weapons after you join. So it's either join and destroy or destroy and join. And I might note that some of that design, I think, has some of the Princeton University folks that worked on the treaty were very influential in making that happen, including, Zia Mian and some people I think you all know very well.
Yes, we do, and we're proud of them. In fact, we honored Dr. Mian at our membership dinner a year ago for his being the scientific advisor in this process. And I see among the attendees tonight is Professor Frank van Hippel, who's one of the co-founders and still an important leader in the program on science and global security. And we've honored Professor van Hippel as well, because to have these world-class experts working hand in glove with our efforts is just a real major asset to our work. So. How do we start to impress nuclear weapon countries to start paying some attention?
Well, I think they are paying attention. And I think that we can keep doing what we're doing and sort of push back against the narrative that this is meaningless. Like what I think a lot of you but certainly a lot of campaigners for nuclear disarmament have been doing their whole lives is rejecting the notion that there is this perpetual right and legitimacy to nuclear weapons, and sort of doing through whatever actions we can. It can be public actions, it can be op-eds in newspapers, it can be working on these calling your council members, your federal representatives, whomever, to join the sort of the mechanisms that we have, like the ICANN parliamentary pledge and the cities appeals and things like this, and telling and making it clear that that they need to pay attention. This is international law, and even in the places where the U.S. may continue to declare that this international law doesn't apply to them, that it actually does, and that there's many important ways in which it will affect them, and that they can, if they continue to sort of pit themselves as just in total opposition to this, it will be to our, disadvantage as Americans. It will not make us more safe. It will not be a vision towards a world that's changing. And, nuclear weapons have never been instruments of security, but they really aren't now. And if we don't adjust for this, we will see nuclear weapons used again. And this is something that I think public opinion polls have been really useful for. We've been conducting more and more of these over the years. And predictably, the US citizenry isn't as strong or as progressive on as we have in some other states. So, it obviously is not going to be the same tactic and the same work that we're doing in the US as we do in every country. But for all of these countries, I think the treaty is the tool, and pushing back against people who talk about it as if it's not meaningful simply because the US has rejected it is going to be something that we can all do, work that we can all do to sort of question that and say, that just because the US doesn't like it doesn't mean that it's not going to be an important contribution to bring us to that world that we want to get to.
Another question, what can we realistically ask the new US administration to do by way of constructive dialogue with the collection of states parties on a process toward nuclear build down?
Right. Well, this is interesting to me because I'm thinking about this. I was just thinking about this before this call and working on some potential asks of this nature. And, first I should say that nothing we're asking for with respect to the TPNW and with respect to working with those states that have already signed and ratified the TPNW undermines or asks the Biden administration to do something differently with respect to some of its priorities in terms of bilateral arms control or unilateral arms control, saving New START and the JCPOA. That's all great. We support that. Risk reduction measures, whether it's canceling this plans to enhance the US nuclear arsenal, that's, these plans that we have right now to spend $2 trillion enhancing our weapons and canceling that, that's great. Removing missiles from hair trigger alert or ending sole presidential authority, that's great. But to bring us closer to a world free of nuclear weapons, we think that there are important steps that they need to take. Yes, they need to sign and ratify the treaty. That's number one. But as they work toward that, there are things they can do, such as renounce this letter I was talking about, for one thing, and declaring that that all states have the right to join this treaty, that they can that they can acknowledge and agree that the treaty doesn't undermine the nuclear non-proliferation treaty or other arms control treaties and reinforces them. This is not controversial. This should be something that the US can do from day one. They can affirm that the very basic notion that any use of nuclear weapons anywhere poses catastrophic humanitarian risk and consequences everywhere. That is something that the Biden administration should be able to do from day one and would be an important contribution towards advancing us closer to the goal that we're working towards. And it can recognize the TPNW, if as nothing else, they can, for starters, do as the UN Secretary General has done and agree that the TPNW represents a meaningful commitment towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. That doesn't seem like a lot to ask. And so we think that's something that they can do from day one. And all of this will help them, as you say, can have a conversation with the states that have taken this position that right now the U.S. considers to be so anathema to them, which is for the ban treaty. But all of this will help bring them closer together.
Well, thank you very much, Seth. And I want to move to our next item then, which is a toast that Ed Aguilar is going to be offering. Let me just mention in introducing Ed that he's been working on this for at least 35 years. and actually was part of one of the early precursors to the treaty, which was developing a draft treaty for the abolition of nuclear weapons some years ago. And along with Ed Ramchellery and Irene Goldman, two of our board members, were at the UN when the treaty was adopted and voted on July 7th of 2017. So we're proud to have been supporting this effort for a long time. And Ed, let me turn the mic over to you to offer a toast now.
Okay. Well, thank you, Bob, and thank you, Seth. Can you hear me okay? I wanted to just mention before the toast that we have with us as well at least 9 leaders from the Pennsylvania Nuclear Ban Alliance that we co-founded back in 2017, I believe it was, the year of the treaty. And so I want to thank them for coming. But of course, I really want to acknowledge and thank Seth. ICANN, we were on a Zoom with Beatrice Finn a few weeks ago, and you have a great group of people working there. So when you work for peace and international security, I'll admit that great victories are rare, but this treaty is certainly one of them. So first, anyone who, I think Nikki asked people to try to bring in glass if they were able, and I see Seth is heading over to get his, so just wait a moment for him to raise a toast to Seth, to ICANN, to all the people working on nuclear reductions and especially abolition. And there's one other person that I want to thank that I've been asked to mention, because another thing we do is try to bring young people along in our work. And that young person, I think she is here today. Danielle Alora, are you there? If so, please raise your hand so we can acknowledge you anyway. Danielle has been working with us on these issues all year. She has also been crowned Miss Pennsylvania for the UN Environmental Program's Miss Earth contest. So, so cheers, salud, and peace to all of you. Thank you. Back to Nikki.
Thanks a lot, Ed. And again, let's give Seth a round of applause, virtual applause here. It was really wonderful to learn more about this outstanding leadership that deservedly got the Nobel Peace Prize, but now the hard part begins of trying to get more and more countries to come on board. Certainly, we also are indebted to precursors like the Landmines Ban Treaty, which also was poo-pooed, before it was negotiated and entered into force. And so this is often the way things happen, is you got to just, find a way to get past these naysayers and say, yes, we can. Just like a recent president we had not too long ago used to like to say that too. Yes, we can. And the world's people need this. And so, Seth, we're so honored to have you with us, and please convey our hearty congratulations to all of the folks that you work with in this process of moving toward a world without nuclear weapons through this, with this nuclear ban treaty as an important milestone along that path.
Thank you, Reverend Moore, and I'll do that. And I agree with you, and thank you for everything that you and all of you have done and are doing. And you mentioned my executive director, Bea Finn, who, she had a quote along those lines at the Nobel Prize ceremony that you remind me of, where she talked about the opposition to the treaty and those who poo-pooed us. And just as they had, as you say, the Mine Bans Convention. And she said, that those who say that that future is not possible need to get out of the way of those who are making it a reality. And I like that one. So thank you for helping us make it real.
Well, you're welcome. Yes, and please stay on because we've saved some of the best for last here. We have an outstanding musician in our midst who is a longtime leader for peacemaking throughout her lifetime, really, and who's an outstanding musician who has prepared some wonderful music for us to enjoy as sort of a capstone tonight to our celebration of this important milestone, and that is Charlene Leahy. Charlene, raise your hand so everybody can see you. We're really indebted to Charlene. And Nikki, could you play Charlene's? And then at the end of the music, we're going to have just a few closing remarks and announcing some upcoming events. So if you could just stay on. Nikki, I think the music, the set is what, 15 to 20 minutes?
There's 2 songs.
2 songs, great.
Yep.
All right, so just sit tight, don't sign off. We're going to come back for a brief closing at the end, and let's enjoy Charlene's music.
Hi, everyone. My name is Charlene Leahy. I feel very honored to be here with you tonight to celebrate this great victory. Thank you, Bob and Nikki, for inviting me to share my music with you. I wrote a song specifically for this occasion, and the song is called If I Can. In early August 45, a new dark age began. 2 unarmed cities were destroyed by 2 bombs on Japan. For generations, the mushroom cloud has haunted us and loomed. We've marched, we've struggled to overcome, turn back the clock of doom. To ban nuclear weapons in the sea and in the air, to ban them everywhere on our planet, our only home. In the year 2007, carried on the wings of youth, a new peace group came into being, dedicated to the truth. In 10 short years, they were recognized for their vision, clear and strong. Soon they held the Nobel Prize. A new movement had been born. To ban nuclear weapons in the sea and in the air, ban them everywhere on our planet, our only home. In the year 2020, amid a global crisis, voices for sanity pierce the awful darkness. On October 24th, to end nuclear madness, 50 nations on Mother Earth made history. To ban nuclear weapons in the sea and in the air, ban them everywhere, for our planet, our only home. On January 22nd, in the year 2021, an internationally binding treaty for prohibition will be done. Nuclear weapons will be made illegal. For the first time in our lives, a torch held high for other nations to join the rising tide, to ban nuclear weapons in the sea and in the air, to ban them everywhere on our planet, our only home. If I can work to build a world at peace, if they can do it, so can we. Now it's up to you and me to ban nuclear weapons in the sea and in the air. Ban them everywhere on our planet, our only home. On June 11th, 1988, I was asked to perform for a group of people known as the Peace Wave, who had traveled all the way from Japan to plead for the abolition of nuclear weapons before the United Nations in New York City. I wrote a song in their honor, which I'd like to share with you now. The song is entitled Peace Wave. I don't want a fancy car, house of $1 million worth. I don't want to be a star, just want some peace on Mother Earth. I don't want a diamond ring, gold or silver for my purse. Just give me the strength to sing for peace on Mother Earth. Can you hear our voices rising? Growing stronger, getting brave. And our hearts are harmonizing. War's devotion cannot stop our wave. I sing my message near and far, up to the mountains over the surf. Every night I wish upon a star for peace on Mother Earth. Can you hear the voices rising? Growing stronger, getting brave. And our hearts are harmonizing. War's devotion cannot stop our wave. So come join the peace wave, and you'll be set free. You'll be part of a peace wave when you choose to be. Someday I'll leave this world below upon a journey of rebirth. But before it's time, I know my home is here on Mother Earth.
Charlene, thank you so much. I could see Seth smiling on that first one, and deservedly so. That was truly outstanding.
I would love to have
Truly outstanding.
That's wonderful.
Yes, we really appreciate it. Well, just a few closing things I wanted to bring to your attention as we draw toward a close of this annual holiday event. First of all, one of the things that we'll be doing, and we try to do it for almost all of our events where there is a recording available, we put that on our website very soon after it's over. And so watch your email or just go to our website, peacecoalition.org. And I think within a day or two, you'll find a link to this recorded event. Please not only watch that for yourself if you'd like to kind of sift through it and reflect more on it, but also send it to your contacts, because this is one of the ways that we can have our own chain reaction of peace, as if we all, each one is teaching one, sort of. And so I think this is, unfortunately, the nuclear ban treaty is not paid very much attention by the mainstream media. And so really one of the ways we can overcome that, ignorance and lethargy about it is for us to be very proactive to share it with our contacts. Then I wanted to also, while you're going to peacecoalition.org, encourage you to come to our last event of the year, which is going to be on New Year's Eve from 5 to 6. We'll be co-sponsoring annually. We've been doing this for a number of years with the Trenton Friends meeting, a peace vigil. And so we hope you'll take a look at that and sign up to join us. Like all online Zoom events, you must register in advance to be able to attend that. Then we already have 2 events planned for the new year. And so I hope you'll take a look at those. On January 18th, we'll be co-sponsoring with the Princeton Clergy Association the annual Martin Luther King Multi-Faith Service. And the Reverend Dr. Charles Boyer, who's a very prominent African-American faith leader here in New Jersey, will be our preacher that night. So do come and join us. People from across the faith spectrum will be participating in that virtual service. And then a service further into the year will be our 42nd annual Multi-Faith Service for Peace, which will come at the start of our the annual Conference for Peace. The 42nd one will come right after that afternoon. And I'm excited to announce you're really the very first people hearing this, so consider yourself privileged. Sister Simone Campbell is confirmed as our preacher for that service. We hope that by then we may be able to gather in person, as we have for many years up until this past November, at the Princeton University Chapel for that service. Sister Simone is a longtime leader for peace and justice, including the Nuns on the Bus. I think many of you remember that brilliant, creative initiative. And so, she's one that you'll really want to mark your calendar and plan to come and hear. We'll be posting more events, but one last thing I'd like to ask you to do between now and year's end, while you're at peacecoalition.org, is go to the button at the upper right and use that contribute button to make your year-end contribution for peace. It's been a challenging year for us. I think we have navigated the challenges generally quite strongly, but one of them that we really can't replace is the inability for people to gather in person has definitely hurt the fundraising aspect of those in-person events that we've been having year after year. So we could use an extra boost here as we approach the end of the year. So I hope that you'll not only visit peacecoalition.org to look at our upcoming events, including New Year's Eve, but also to make your year-end donation if you haven't yet done so. Thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. And let's again show our appreciation to Seth and to Charlene. Outstanding evening. And we are so grateful for your interest and your support. Have a wonderful holiday season and a blessed and peaceful new year to each and every one of you. Hope to see you soon. And one thing I forgot is that we were going to do a vigil tomorrow to publicly advocate for the nuclear ban treaty and specifically for the US to join it. Unfortunately, because of the COVID health concerns, but as well as now the weather concerns, we've had to cancel that. So other than the New Year's Eve peace vigil, this is our second to the last event of the year. Again, have a great evening and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Bob.